By 1080, the known world was still defining itself and drawing the boundaries through which they would be the conduits of history. Beginning with Europe, the most notable feature was the Volksreich, at a sprawling zenith of its power in the late 11th century. The other major and defining powers of Europe were Novgorod to the north, working to reconquer its lost territories, the compact yet stalwart pagans of Prussia, and the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines were steadily reclaiming their former lands, snaking their way up through the disunited Balkans and the Adriatic coast. They were also striking out against the various kingdoms of Anatolia, which proved to some degree more difficult. Regardless, they were quietly piling up victories and rebuilding their long-lost empire without much notice from the other courts of Europe. Speaking of these courts, they were in a state of general factionalism. Italy was broken into various warring states, though Milano, Sicilia, and the Volksreich were the most major players there by far. The Gallic region was also divided in a major way, but in a neater, more delineated fashion. Gévaudan, Vexin, Artois, Orléans, and Rossello were the most major players there, the seat of the papacy traveling from place to place. Iberia was mostly the domain of the Moorish kingdoms, like the Yusufiun, the Bilalids, the Hayyun, and the Aghlabid, but Asturias and Nafarroa presented a stalwart and long-suffering Catholic resistance there. The British Isles were in a state of total war with each other, filled with Vikings, Anglo-Saxons, and foreign powers like Novgorod and even the Volksreich, the latter of which utterly neglected the region and saw it as an undue expense on the rest of the realm. Eastern Europe was dominated by Novgorod, but the tribes to the east threatened their hegemony, namely the Perim, Ayabir, and the Aykid. The Middle East was much more well-defined, with the Fatimid Empire claiming Persia after subduing the dual Turkish threats which had exhausted each other, now reduced to mountain tribes. The Fatimid filled this role, and they had remained comfortably in said role for nearly 200 years by the 1080s. The Ashrafids claimed most of Arabia, but Arabia held the holiest sites in Islam. India, or rather what was known of it, was firmly divided, but the largest kingdom there was the Jainist Vadodarids. Finally, Africa was divided, encroached upon by the Muslims to the east, and in the throes of religious overhaul, their ancient animism reworked into something that may be able to protect them in the long run. In September of 1080, Sarah the Cruel declared war on Capua in order to take valuable and fertile farmland from them, and by 1081 had taken it with ease, having commanded an 18,000-man army, more than quadruple what their entire kingdom could field. That campaign further bolstered a lust within her for war, and kick-started a new era of Volkish conquest. Meanwhile, the Catholics seethed. They recalled their heroic conquest of Rome from the Muslims, only to have it stolen out from beneath them by heretics of the most perfidious type. On the 2nd of April, the newest pope, Pope Leo VI, gathered all the cardinals and church officials he could find to his secret court. It was said that he gave a sermon lasting the entire day, ultimately declaring war upon the Volksreich by the time the sun set. His goal was the retaking of Rome, and furthermore exacting revenge upon those who humiliated the pontifical seat and the Holy Catholic Church. This war was exceedingly difficult to fight, largely due to the fact that the Pope was in exile in an unknown location and held no real territory, only that which he was allowed to use by the faithful. So the Kaiserin used her spies to try and kidnap him. One of the Pope's guards was amenable to bribery, allowing Volkish spies to try and take the Pope while he slept. The ferocity of the Pope's struggle proved too loud, and the kidnappers were forced to flee when those of his loyal guards came running. Nobody was able to discern who the kidnappers were, however. Meanwhile, on the 7th of October 1083, relatively ambivalent about wars not concerning the church that he himself headed, Patriarch Erhard declared the Fourth Albigensian Crusade, seeking to create an Albigensian kingdom of Kiev carved out of Prussia, that ancient enemy of the Volksreich. 21,000 men were raised for this occasion, seeing absolution of sins in the blood of their former oppressors. Kaiserin Sarah was not necessarily pleased at this development, but was nevertheless convinced of her ability to win both wars. On the 30th of January, 1085, the late Bishop Bertolf was declared an Albigensian saint for his incredible piety, some even saying that he was spoken to by God himself concerning the state of Christendom and the works of man. Forevermore he was known as Saint Bertolf the Pious. Around this time, the people of Verona also petitioned to have Kaiser Hermann canonized, but that proposal was personally struck down by Kaiserine Sarah, who subsequently raised their taxes. Shortly thereafter, on the 6th of February, a recently parted member of the Volkish court was recognized for his incredible generosity, dying while in service to the poor and destitute, now known as Saint Vistrance the monk. For the Albigensian faithful, the late 11th century was a time of unmatched holy fervor and celebration, characterized as truly being an age of saints. By April of 1085, all the officials and prominent people of Rome were Albigensian, and save for certain underground pockets, it was truly an Albigensian city. Meanwhile, the Albigensian crusade in Prussia was dragging along. Initial success was found by bursting through their marcher lands with over 14,000 men and laying siege to all in their path, but this force was eventually repelled by an equally sized Prussian force. Another army was gathered from all corners of the empire and sent to fight the pagans, and 18,000 men rushed into battle with the enemy 14,000. They won at first, but wave after wave of pagans pushed them back again. With the crusade going so poorly, Kaiserine Sarah didn't at first notice that a revolt had taken some of her territory in the British Isles, a few counties gained once many ages ago through marriage, but she didn't care. This crusade had consumed her, as it presented her with the possibility of her first real loss as Kaiserine, which was totally unacceptable to her. She even emptied her coffers to hire tens of thousands of mercenaries to win this crusade at all costs. While she truly was one of the strongest leaders the Volksreich had yet seen, many advisors at court began to grow anxious of her bloody governance. Meanwhile, in Africa, the high priestess of their poorly understood faith declared a holy war on the Ptolemy Sultanate. During this time, Pope Leo VI suffered a stroke, nearly killing him. Many around him said it was the price he paid for seeking vengeance, while others said it was simply his high-strung nature concerning the course of his war. After much prayer and deliberation, and the advice of his physicians, the Pope gave up on his goal of retaking Rome, resettling officially in Orléans, in the court of Roy Sylvester Croillon. Meanwhile, Kaiserine Sarah the Cruel had been on the precipice of victory in what had become known as her crusade several times, only to have been thrown off of it, which taught a lesson, and that lesson was one of false retreats and slow sieges. She realized that storming their castles was not effective, and that her army would be much too small to handle combat in the field if they all died assaulting fortresses. So, learning this lesson that was so much against her very nature, she pulled back, recuperated her forces, and resumed the crusade with two armies of 12,000 men. After slow successes and much money spent, Kaiserine Sarah was finally on the cusp of winning the war. However, by 1096, Patriarch Erhard called off the crusade for Kiev due to a revolt of soldiers near the border. Many of them, on the order of thousands, abandoned the crusade, and others went raiding for their own benefit. As such, the crusade was lost, and so Erhard decided to end it to save face, and make it seem as though it was under his control. Ironically, Patriarch Erhard saved the life of his Catholic counterpart by redirecting his monarch's monumental rage away from him and towards the east. Kaiserine Sarah was said to have spent the night in the dungeon, venting her bloodlust on those poor souls below. Meanwhile, in Africa, the pagan holy war for Ptolemy went poorly. They had many successes in claiming small oases and villages, but when they got to the first walled city, they ultimately failed, as it was most likely destined to without more proper cohesion. On the 26th of February, 1098, the late Bishop Ortolf was recognized for his piety and masterful education of the masses, and declared a saint. He was hence dubbed Saint Ortolf the Wise. Attempting to take out her rage on a lesser kingdom, Kaiserine Sarah the Cruel declared war on Capua yet again. Kappa, however, scarred from their previous encounter with the bloody woman of the Volksreich, called upon the newly formed kingdom of Lombardia. Together they acted swiftly and were able to push the Volksreich back, resulting in a shocking loss. This made her reflect on her life, leading her to sequester herself away for months afterward. When she emerged, she lowered her armies and adopted an orphan to be her heir, whose name was Ruprecht. In 1099, Moldova changed hands to become the Kingdom of Novasil, changing the dynamics of power in the region.